The note Renata left on the kitchen counter had 7 items on it. 6 of them were normal. The 7th one said, "Do not open the basement door for any reason, and if Owen is standing in front of it, bring him to another room without making a big deal of it." That was it. No explanation, no asterisk, just written in her neat, slanted handwriting between Pepper's evening pill is in the orange pill pocket in the pantry, and Owen's bedtime is 8:30. No negotiating. I read it twice, then set it down and told myself it was probably a safety thing. Old basements in old houses, exposed wiring maybe, an unstable staircase. I'd sat for families before who had locked off rooms for completely practical reasons. A home office, a storage area full of fragile things. I didn't think much of it that second Friday. I pocketed the note, fed Pepper her pill wrapped in a piece of deli turkey, and went to find Owen. He was in the living room, building something with Legos that he explained was a submarine but looked more like a flat rectangle with a tower on one end. He held it up and rotated it slowly so I could see all angles, which is something I've noticed kids do. They show you things with the seriousness of a museum curator, and they expect you to match the energy. I told him it looked fast. He seemed satisfied with that. We had a normal evening. He ate the leftover pasta Renata had portioned into a container, with his name written across the lid in blue marker. He watched about 20 minutes of his deep-sea documentary. We were apparently into anglerfish territory now, and he asked me whether I thought the light on an anglerfish's head hurt it, or if the fish liked it. I said I didn't know. He thought about it for a moment and said, "I think it likes it because it helps it find things in the dark." Then he looked at me and added, "Some things need a light to come out." I thought that was a fairly profound thing for a 6-year-old to say. I wrote it in my phone notes later, because I was studying early childhood development, and I collected little observations like that. I had no other reason for writing it down. Not yet. Bedtime went smoothly. 8:30, lights out, 1 glass of water. He was asleep by 8:45. I didn't see him go near the basement door that night. Pepper sat on the couch next to me and watched television with the focused attention of a dog who genuinely believes something important is happening on screen. Daniel and Renata came home at 11, another uneventful evening. I went home thinking the note was strange but not worth dwelling on. The 3rd Friday was when it started. I got to the house at 6. Renata met me at the door with her coat already on, keys in her hand. She gave me a quick rundown. Owen had eaten a snack after school. Pepper had already been walked. There was soup on the stove that just needed reheating. Then she paused, and I could see her deciding something. "He's been doing a thing," she said. I waited. "He talks to the basement door. Has been for about 3 weeks. She kept her voice even, like she was telling me about a new homework routine. "We think it's an imaginary friend situation. His therapist says it's normal for his age, and that we shouldn't draw a lot of attention to it." I nodded. That made sense to me. I'd seen imaginary friend behavior plenty of times in kids Owen's age. Some kids talked to corners of rooms. Some had invisible companions who sat next to them at meals. It's a normal developmental thing. The brain is working something out. So if you see him there, just redirect, Renata said. Don't interrogate him about it. Don't play along too much. Just casual redirection. Snack, activity, whatever. Got it. She hesitated 1 more second. And the door stays locked, just so we're clear. Even if he asks. I told her, of course. She nodded, and then Daniel appeared behind her, and they left. Owen was in his room when I came in. He was sitting on his loft bed, with a book open in his lap, but he wasn't reading it. He was looking at the window. The window faced the backyard, and the backyard was dark, just the shape of the fence, and the neighbor's light cutting a thin line across the grass. Hey, I said. He looked at me. Hi, Kara. He said my name the way kids that age do, pulling the vowel out slightly. Kara. Did you eat dinner? Not yet, there's soup. He nodded seriously. The soup is good. My mum puts dill in it. He said dill, like he'd recently learned what it was, and was still deciding how he felt about it. We ate soup at the kitchen table. Owen told me about a thing that happened at school, where somebody's show-and-tell rabbit had escaped and run under the art teacher's desk. and the way he told the story, the pauses, the escalating detail, the eventual triumphant recapture, was genuinely funny. I laughed and so did he, and for the first part of the evening it was as easy and ordinary as the 2 weeks before. Then, around 7:30, I was washing the soup bowls, and Owen had gone quiet in the way that kids sometimes do when they've wandered off into their own heads. I dried my hands and went to find him. He was in the kitchen, standing about 3 feet from the basement door, not touching it, not knocking, just standing there, with his head tilted slightly, the same way his father tilted his head when he was thinking. He was talking. His voice was low, not whispering, but low in the way that people lower their voices in church or a library, not performing quietness, just instinctively at a register that felt appropriate for the conversation he was having. I couldn't make out words at first. I stood in the doorway between the living room and the kitchen, and I watched him for a moment before saying anything. He nodded twice. Then he said, "Okay, but she said I'm not supposed to." Pause. Head tilt. "I know, but she locks it." His voice was patient. He sounded like he was explaining something he'd explained before. Then he glanced up and saw me. His expression didn't change the way a guilty kid's expression changes. He didn't look startled or caught. He just looked at me calmly and said, "I was talking to my friend." "I can see that," I said. I kept my voice easy, like Renata had suggested. "Come on, let's go pick what you want to watch before it gets too close to bedtime." He came without argument. He looked back once at the door, but only for a second. I got him settled with his documentary. I went back to the kitchen, stood in front of the basement door, and listened. Nothing. It was a door, a regular interior door painted white, with a bolt lock slid into place above the handle. There was no sound from below. No movement. No smell. The only thing I noticed, standing close to it, was that the air near the bottom of the door was slightly cooler than the rest of the kitchen, which made sense. Basements are cooler. That's not unusual. I went back to the living room. Owen said, "He likes you, by the way." I looked at him. He was watching the television. "Your friend?" "Mm-hmm." He pulled his knees up to his chest. "He said you seem nice. He could tell from your voice." I thought about that. From my voice. Owen nodded without looking away from the screen. He hears everything in the kitchen. I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything. I sat down on the other end of the couch, and Pepper jumped up between us, and we watched anglerfish move through black water, with their cold blue lights trailing ahead of them. At 8:47, I was getting Owen's water for bed. He was already in his pajamas, standing in the kitchen doorway when he said it. "He already knows your name. He heard you say it when you came in." I went still for a second, holding the glass under the faucet. "Is that right?" I said. Owen nodded. "You said it to my mum, when she was leaving." He was matter-of-fact about it. No drama, no performance. He remembers names. He said he never forgets a name, once he hears one. I turned off the faucet. "Okay, bud, let's get you to bed." He took his water and walked ahead of me down the hall without another word about it. He was asleep by 9. I sat on the couch for a while after that. Pepper had fallen asleep with her head on the armrest. The house made the small sounds that houses make at night, the refrigerator cycling, a car passing outside, the faint hiss of the heat. I looked at the kitchen doorway from where I was sitting. I couldn't see the basement door from the couch, but I knew it was there. I was not scared. I want to be clear about that, because it would be easy to say I had some profound feeling right then, some instinct that told me something was wrong. The truth is that I mostly felt a little tired and a lot curious. Owen was a kid with an active imagination and a therapist who had told his parents that imaginary friends were developmentally normal. Kids sometimes say things that sound strange, and they don't even know they're doing it. But I did write down what he'd said, in my phone, like I'd done with the anglerfish comment. He never forgets a name, once he hears one. I told myself it was for my early childhood development class. I didn't have a regular sitter for the gap between that third Friday and the following one. Renata messaged me on the Tuesday to ask if I was available again that Friday, and also the Saturday after, since they had a dinner event. I said yes to both. She sent me a thumbs up emoji and then, a few minutes later, a separate message that said, "Also, I know you probably have questions about the basement thing. We can talk before we leave on Friday if you want." I appreciated that. It told me that she knew it was strange enough to acknowledge. We weren't going to pretend the note on the counter hadn't said what it said. When I got there Friday, Daniel was still getting ready, and Renata had about 10 minutes before they needed to leave. She poured herself a glass of water and leaned against the kitchen counter and talked. The short version was this. Owen had started spending time near the basement door about a month ago. At first it was just standing there, the way young kids sometimes stop in front of things and stare. A picture on the wall, a shadow, whatever their brain latches onto. Then they noticed he was talking. Quietly, but clearly talking. Saying things like he was having a conversation. They had checked the basement. Daniel had gone down twice. It was a regular unfinished basement. Some storage boxes, the water heater, the furnace, an old workbench that had been there when they bought the house. No animals, no moisture problem. No one was down there. They had talked to Owen about it. He said his friend lived behind the door. They asked what his friend's name was. Owen said he didn't have one yet. "Didn't have one yet," I repeated. Renata shook her head. "That's what he said." I assumed it was just kid logic, like he hadn't assigned a name yet. She paused. "His therapist says the no-name thing is unusual but not alarming. Usually kids name their imaginary companions, but sometimes they don't." Daniel came into the kitchen, already in his coat. He looked at me and then at Renata. "You telling her about the basement thing?" "Yeah." He nodded. He didn't add anything to what she'd said, but he also didn't look like he thought the conversation was unnecessary. He looked like someone who had been thinking about something and was relieved to know other people were also thinking about it. "One more thing," Renata said. "We've told Owen he can't open the door. He can talk to whoever he thinks is there, but the door doesn't open. He's agreed to that, so he shouldn't try to get you to open it." She picked up her bag. "But if he does ask, the answer is no, and you don't have to explain why." "He knows why." "Why did you put the lock up high?" I asked. "The bolt." She looked at the door. "We put that in about 3 weeks ago, after this started. We wanted to make sure he couldn't get down there alone." She said it simply, and I believed that was the reason. They left. Owen appeared from his bedroom, where he'd been doing something with his dinosaurs, and we started the evening. It was a good evening, mostly. We made grilled cheese, which Owen supervised with the seriousness of an executive chef, directing me to press the spatula down on the bread at regular intervals. We played 2 rounds of Uno, and I cheated the same way Daniel apparently did, which Owen noticed and announced with vindicated outrage. I helped him with a reading worksheet his teacher had sent home. He was working on a list of sight words, and he had strong opinions about which ones were unfair. Because was apparently the most unfair word in the English language, and he felt the teacher should know this. It was almost 8:15 before I noticed where he'd gone quiet again. He was in the kitchen, not standing at the door this time. He was sitting on the floor, cross-legged, about 2 feet away from it. His back was mostly to me. He had one of his dinosaurs in his hand, a small green stegosaurus, and he was walking it slowly across the tile in front of him, not toward the door, just back and forth, like he was keeping his hands occupied while he talked. I stood in the doorway and listened this time, properly listened, instead of just watching. "She said it's not up to her," Owen was saying. "She said the door belongs to my mum and dad." Short pause. "I know, I told her that." Another pause. "She probably would if she knew you better. She's nice." He turned the stegosaurus around and walked it back the other direction. "I don't think she's scared." "She doesn't seem like she's scared." Pause. Slight tilt of the head. Then, quietly, "Yeah, okay, I can ask her." He turned around then. He saw me standing there, and he didn't look surprised. "He wants to know if you'd want to say hi," Owen said. Something about the way he said it made me keep my voice completely neutral. "What does saying hi look like?" Owen thought about it. "Just stand by the door. He'll talk. You might not be able to hear him at first. He said some people take a while." "Has anyone said hi before?" Owen nodded. Maggie did. I didn't know who Maggie was. Who's Maggie? She used to babysit me. He stood up, brushing off his pajama pants. He'd already changed for bed on his own, which I'd noticed earlier and appreciated. But she doesn't come anymore. How come? He shrugged. Not evasively. Genuinely. The way kids shrug when they don't have the information. She just stopped. I told him it was bedtime. He went without protesting, which, at 8:15 for a 6-year-old, is either a sign that they're very tired or that they're done with the conversation because they got what they needed from it. I couldn't tell which it was. After he was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with my phone and searched Renata Vasquez in the Columbus, Ohio area. I found a LinkedIn, a neighborhood directory listing, a photo from a PTA meeting that had been posted by someone else. I found Daniel's name connected to a landscaping company. Nothing useful. Then I searched Sitter Connect for the Vasquez listing and looked at the reviews. The app had a feature where families could leave ratings for sitters, but sitters could also leave a note about a family. Nothing public, just a short internal note, visible only to the sitter network, designed to flag things like payment issues or difficult kids. Most families had nothing. The Vasquez listing had one note, left by a sitter I didn't know. Her handle was Magdalena B88. The note just said quit after third visit, house felt off, couldn't explain it, wouldn't go back. Magdalena. Maggie. I sat with that for a while. The rational thing, the thing I kept coming back to, was that house felt off meant basically nothing. People say that about all kinds of places. Sometimes you have a bad night with a difficult kid, and you process it as the house feeling wrong, rather than just a rough shift. Maybe Owen had been harder to handle for Magdalena. Maybe something else had happened entirely. Quitting after 3 visits wasn't alarming. Babysitters quit jobs all the time. But Owen had said Maggie stood at the door, and he had said she stopped coming, and I didn't know whether those two things were connected or not. I checked the basement door before I left that night. I don't know exactly why. I just went and stood in front of it and looked at it, the way I'd done the week before. The bolt was in place. The door was flush in its frame. The air at the base of it was cool. I put my hand flat against the wood. I don't know what I expected. The door was just a door, slightly cold, painted white, with a skim of dust along the top edge where the painter had gone too fast. Normal. I took my hand off it when I heard the heat kick on. I thought about it the rest of that weekend. I want to be honest about that, because it would be easy to say I brushed it off and went back to my normal life. But that's not quite true. I thought about the way Owen had tilted his head, the pauses, like he was genuinely listening to something. The fact that he'd named a previous babysitter who, as far as I could tell, matched the note on Sitter Connect. He was 6 years old. He hadn't invented Maggie. Maggie had been real, and she had left. The thing about working with kids, which people who don't work with kids sometimes underestimate, is that you spend a lot of time learning to distinguish between a child who is creating a story and a child who is reporting something. They're not the same thing. When a kid is making something up, an imaginary game, a bit of pretend, there's a lightness to it. They'll revise it mid-sentence. They'll look at you to see how it's landing. They'll incorporate your reactions. When a kid is telling you something real, even something that sounds impossible, there's a flatness to it. Not a dramatic flatness, just the plainness of someone stating a fact. Owen had the flat voice. Every time he talked about his friend, I didn't know what to do with that. I still don't, fully, but it's something I noticed. Saturday evening, the dinner event night, I arrived at 6:30. Renata and Daniel were still getting ready. Owen let me in. He'd been watching from the window, apparently, and had opened the door before I'd knocked. He was wearing a button-up shirt that I strongly suspected Renata had put him in for the occasion of the guests, given how rapidly he unbuttoned the top button the moment his mother's back was turned. "Can I show you something?" he asked, the moment we were alone in the hallway. I said sure. He led me to the kitchen, not to the basement door, past the basement door, to the counter beside the fridge. There was a small clay bowl there, the kind kids make in elementary school art class, glazed in uneven green. Inside the bowl there were three things: a dime, a small clear marble, and a piece of paper folded into a square. "Those are for him," Owen said. I looked at the bowl. "You made those?" "The bowl I made. The stuff inside is from him." He said it simply. "The dime was under my pillow. The marble was in my shoe." He pointed at the folded paper. "I don't know what that is. Can I look at it?" He shrugged, which I took as yes. I unfolded it. It was a standard piece of loose-leaf paper, the kind in any kid's homework folder, unlined on this piece. On it, in pencil, were two things: a series of short horizontal lines, 5 of them, like tally marks but grouped differently, in pairs. And below them, one word, printed carefully in a child's handwriting. The word was soon. I looked at Owen. "Did you write this?" He shook his head. "Are you sure?" He gave me the look that kids give you when they're certain of something, and slightly offended by the question. "I don't know how to write soon in cursive yet." "We're only on print." The letters weren't in cursive. They were in plain printed capitals. Any 6-year-old working on sight words might have written it, but Owen was looking at me steadily, and I believed him. "Where did you find this?" I asked. "On the floor by the door. This morning." I refolded it and put it back in the bowl. I tried to think of explanations. The most obvious one was that Owen had written it and forgotten he had. Kids do that. Get into a project and then disconnect from it. The second was that one of his parents had left it. The third was that it had been there a while, and he'd noticed it today. I also thought about the thing I didn't want to think about, and I pushed it aside. "Owen," I said carefully, "does he ever ask you to do things?" The boy considered the question with more seriousness than I expected. "Sometimes." "Like what?" "He asks me to talk to the people who come over." He paused. "He says it helps him." "Helps him how?" Owen tilted his head. "He says it gets lonely down there. He says if people know he's there, it's less dark." I let that sit for a second. "Has he asked you to do anything else?" Owen looked at me, and then at the bowl. "He asked me to ask you something." "What?" "He wants to know how long you're staying tonight." I felt something shift in my chest that I couldn't quite name. Not fear exactly, more like the feeling you get when you realize you've been standing on ice that is thinner than you thought, and you've been on it long enough that turning back isn't a simple matter. "Tell him I'm staying until your parents get home," I said. Owen nodded. He walked over to the basement door. He stood in front of it, not touching it, and he said quietly, "She's staying till they get back." A pause. Then he turned around. He says okay. He says he's glad. Renata and Daniel appeared in the kitchen doorway then, dressed and ready. Renata looked at Owen standing near the door, and her expression moved through something. Not alarm, not quite, but something careful and practiced at staying calm. She said, "Owen, come give me a hug before we leave." He went to her, and she held him for a moment with her eyes closed, and Daniel looked at me over both of them, with the expression of a man who is managing something he doesn't fully have a handle on. They left. I fed Pepper. I reheated soup for Owen and me. We ate at the table, and he told me about the sight words, and I told him that I also thought because was unreasonable, and he laughed with his whole face, the way kids laugh when an adult agrees with something they've been saying for a while. At 7:45, I asked him, as casually as I could manage, "Has your friend ever asked you to open the door?" Owen stopped chewing. He swallowed. He put his spoon down. "Yes," he said. "What do you say when he asks?" I say I can't. My mum locked it. He picked his spoon back up. He says the lock doesn't matter. He says the door opens if the person on this side wants it to. I kept my voice level. "Do you want it to?" Owen looked at me for a long moment. His face was serious. Not afraid, not excited, just serious. The museum curator face. "Not yet," he said. I didn't ask him what yet meant. I didn't know if I wanted the answer. After he was asleep, I went to the basement door for the 3rd time. I stood in front of it for a while. The kitchen was quiet. The house was quiet. Pepper was asleep in the living room. I looked at the bolt, the one Renata had installed 3 weeks ago, too high for Owen to reach. I noticed something I hadn't noticed before. The bolt wasn't engaged because someone had slid it. The bolt was engaged because the slot it rested in was slightly bent, slightly deformed, as if someone had pushed against the door from the other side hard enough to stress the metal. Not hard enough to break it, but hard enough to leave a mark. The door opened inward, into the kitchen. The bolt slid through a bracket that was mounted on the door frame. If something from below, from the basement side, had pushed outward, the door would push toward the kitchen, toward me, and the bolt would pull against the bracket it was seated in. The bending was on the bracket side, the kitchen side. I stood there looking at that for I don't know how long. Then I checked, for the first time, whether there was anything on the basement door itself that I'd missed. Not the frame, the door. I bent down and looked at the bottom of it, where the clearance gap met the floor, and I saw that the paint along the bottom edge was scraped. Thin, even scratches, horizontal, running the full width of the door, about a quarter inch up from the floor, like something had been pushed through the gap. Something thin, paper thin. The dime was under my pillow. The marble was in my shoe. I don't know what that is. I stood up. I turned off the kitchen light. I went to the living room. I did not go back to the kitchen for the rest of the night. When Renata and Daniel came home at 11:30, I was sitting on the couch with Pepper, asleep across my feet. I had been sitting there for 2.5 hours, with my textbook open in my lap, and not one word of it read. Renata could tell something was off. She asked if I was okay. I said I was fine, just tired. I thought about telling her what I'd noticed, the bent bracket, the scrapes at the base of the door. I thought about asking her if she'd seen them before. I didn't. Not that night. I told myself I wanted to think about it first. Figure out what I was actually saying before I said it. Daniel drove me to the bus stop. It was cold, and the street was empty at that hour, and on the way I almost asked him who had put the bolt lock in, whether he'd done it himself, and when, and whether the bracket had been straight when he installed it. I didn't ask that either. When I got home, I sat at my kitchen table, my own kitchen table, in my apartment, with my normal door that led to my normal hallway, and I opened my phone. I sent a message to Magdalena B88 through the Sitter Connect platform. The app had an internal message function between sitters. Most people didn't use it, but it was there. I typed, "Hi, I saw your note about the Vasquez family. I'm currently sitting for them. Can I ask you a couple questions?" I sent it. I didn't know if she'd respond. The note she'd left was undated, so I didn't know how long ago she'd stopped sitting for them. I turned off my kitchen light and went to bed. My phone buzzed at 1:17 a.m. Magdalena. "Yeah, I can talk. Don't go back to that house." I lay in the dark and read it 3 times. Then a second message came through. "Magdalena, whatever Owen told you about his friend, how many times has he asked you to open the door?" I typed back, "He hasn't. He asked me to stand near it." There was a pause, long enough that I thought she might have put her phone down. Then, "Magdalena, that's how it starts. It goes in a specific order. Did he tell you the door opens if the person on that side wants it to?" My hands felt strange. Not shaking, just strange. "Yes," I typed. Her response came fast this time, like she'd been waiting. "Magdalena, he's not telling Owen that. He's getting Owen to tell you. There's a difference. Owen is a nice kid. He's not doing anything wrong. He doesn't understand what he's in the middle of. But listen to me. It can't open the door itself. It's been trying to get someone on that side to open it for it. That's what the whole thing is. That's the whole game. Be careful about how much you want to know, because wanting to know more is part of how it works." I read that message 4 times. I typed, "What is it?" She didn't answer that one. What she sent instead was a single line. "Magdalena, did you touch the door?" I remembered my hand flat against the painted wood, the cool surface, how long I'd stood there. "Yes," I typed. Another long pause. "Magdalena, then it already knows you'd open it. It only lets you touch it if it thinks you would. If you weren't someone who would open it, touching it wouldn't have felt like anything. What did it feel like?" I thought about that moment, my hand on the door, the air around it, cool and still, the way I'd stood there, and how it had not occurred to me to move away. It had felt like standing in front of something that was waiting patiently. It had felt like being recognized. I put my phone face down on the mattress and lay there in the dark of my bedroom for a long time. I was supposed to go back next Friday. Magdalena didn't send anything else that night. I checked my phone twice before I fell asleep, and once more when I woke up at 3 a.m. and lay there listening to my upstairs neighbor's floor creak. Nothing. Just that last message sitting there, and my unread reply below it. I had written, I don't know what it felt like. I'd have to think about it. Which was a lie, and I think some part of me knew it was a lie when I typed it. But I wasn't ready to say the true thing to a stranger at 1 in the morning. I fell back asleep somewhere around 4. When I woke up properly, at 7, the messages were still there, and Magdalena still hadn't replied. I made coffee and sat with my phone on the counter and read the whole exchange from the beginning. In the morning light, some of it felt different, less heavy. I'd been tired and spooked and sitting alone in the dark. That's the right combination of conditions to make almost anything feel significant. A bent bracket on a door could mean 100 things. Paint scraped at the base of a door in a house built in the 60s could mean 100 more. What Magdalena had written, it only lets you touch it if it thinks you would. That was the kind of thing that sounded like a rule, but wasn't one. That was someone who'd been scared building a logic around the fear. I understood the impulse. I'd taken enough developmental psychology to recognize how humans construct frameworks to manage what they don't understand. Magdalena had been scared. She'd quit, and somewhere in the processing of it, she'd turned the experience into something with laws and mechanisms. It made the fear feel more controllable. I was not judging her for it, but I also wasn't going to take her framework as fact. That was what I told myself that Sunday morning. I went to my shift at the daycare. I came home. I did laundry, read 2 chapters of my textbook, texted my friend Danny about plans we'd been vaguely making for weeks. Normal Sunday things. I did not look at my phone for Magdalena's response. I left it alone. She messaged at 8:47 that evening. Magdalena, sorry, had work. I want to explain something, but I'm not sure how to say it, so it doesn't sound like I lost my mind. Can we call? I looked at the message for a second, then typed back, sure, you can call me. She called 3 minutes later. Her voice was quieter than I expected. Not nervous, just measured. She sounded like someone who had rehearsed what they were going to say, at least a few times, but was still watching her words carefully. I want to start with the things that are just facts, she said, because I know how the rest of it sounds, and I don't want you to tune out before we get to the part that actually matters. Okay, I said. I sat for Owen for 6 weeks last spring. He started doing the door thing around week 3, same as you. His parents told me the same thing they told you. Imaginary friend, therapist says not to worry. I wasn't worried. He's a sweet kid, and kids do weird stuff. She paused. The first time I really paid attention was when he said the friend had been there longer than they had, longer than the family. I asked him what he meant, and he said his friend had been there since before the house was a house. I didn't say anything. That's not something a 6-year-old thinks to say. That's not imaginary friend vocabulary. So I started paying attention to what Owen was actually saying versus what it sounded like superficially. And the thing I noticed, she stopped. The thing I noticed was that Owen wasn't generating the content. He was relaying it. There's a difference in how kids talk when they're inventing something versus when they're repeating something. You probably know this. Yeah, I said. I noticed that too. Right, a breath. So I started asking Owen questions. Not about the friend specifically, just indirect questions about the basement, like whether he'd ever been down there, what he thought was down there, stuff like that. And Owen said his friend didn't like it when people asked about the basement. He said it made his friend sad. Sad, that was the word, not angry, sad, like it was a sensitive subject. Her voice shifted slightly. I thought that was interesting, because it's a manipulation, right? If you want someone not to ask about something, you tell them asking hurts you. Kids understand that immediately. And whatever's down there, whatever Owen was channeling, or talking to, whatever you want to call it, it understood exactly how to talk to a 6-year-old. Sad instead of angry, lonely instead of threatening. The word landed somewhere in my chest. Lonely. He says it gets lonely down there. At the end of my 5th visit, Magdalena continued, Owen asked me if I would be willing to introduce myself to his friend. Just say my name near the door. He said his friend wanted to know who was looking after him. I said sure, because I thought, I'll just say hi and then redirect, the whole thing the parents told me to do. A short pause. I walked up to the door and said my name, and Owen said his friend said thank you. And then you left after the 6th visit, I said. I left because during the 6th visit, Owen told me his friend wanted to show me something. He said if I looked at the door right when the kitchen light caught it a certain way, I could see where he'd been waiting for a long time. Owen pointed to the door, to the wood at the bottom of it, the part near the floor. I thought about the scrapes, the thin, horizontal lines. Those marks were already there when I saw them, I said quietly. Yes, she said it without surprise. Did you look at them closely? Yeah, they run the full width of the door, like something was pushed through the gap. Look again, Magdalena said. Look at them with your phone flashlight, close up. They're not all the same. Some of them are different from the others. I thought about the scrapes along the bottom edge. I'd looked at them for maybe 10 seconds in a kitchen with the overhead light on. I hadn't studied them. What's different about them? I asked. Silence on her end for a moment. Some of them are horizontal, going side to side like you said. Those ones are from whatever's been slid through. The paper, the coin, whatever it passes to Owen. But some of them are vertical, going up and down. And they're not random. They're grouped. She paused again. Owen told me it was practicing. Practicing what? She didn't answer that directly. How many nights have you been there? 3. Did anything come through the door? To Owen. I thought about the bowl on the counter, the dime, the marble, the folded piece of paper with the tally marks and the word soon. Yes, I said. A short silence. I need to ask you something, and I need you to think about it honestly. Okay? Have you felt like you wanted to know more? Not about Owen, or the family, or the situation. I mean specifically about what's in that basement. Have you felt curious about it, in a way that felt a little bit stronger than normal curiosity? I thought about Sunday morning, the coffee, the rational explanations I'd run through, how they'd felt like effort, how it had been easier, in the dark of that house, just to stand close to the door and feel whatever it was I'd felt. I said. That's the mechanism, Magdalena said. That's how it works. It doesn't threaten you. It doesn't scare you away. It makes you curious. It makes you feel like you're close to understanding something. And that feeling is addictive in its own way. And it just compounds, week after week, until one night you're standing there and you think, well, what would it hurt to just look, just see? And you put your hand on the handle. Did you? She was quiet. Magdalena, did you open the door? I put my hand on the handle, she said finally. I didn't turn it. I stepped back, and I called the Vasquezes and told them I couldn't come back, and I blocked their number, and I wrote that note on the app. Her voice was even, like she'd processed it thoroughly and come out the other side steady. I think if I'd turned it, I'd have gone down the stairs. I think if I'd gone down the stairs, I wouldn't have come back up. I don't know that, but that's what I think. Neither of us said anything for a moment. Why does it want someone to open the door? I asked. I don't know. I've thought about it a lot. I don't have an answer for you. A pause. But I think it's been there a long time, and I think it's been asking for a long time. And the Vasquezes don't know what they're living on top of, or if they do, they haven't admitted it to themselves. They're good people. Owen is a good kid. But that thing has been working on their son for months, and it is patient in a way that I find hard to think about too much. I had been standing in my kitchen this whole time. I sat down on the floor, just sat down, right there on the linoleum, back against the cabinet, because my legs felt like they wanted to stop being responsible for me. The tally marks, I said, on the paper it sent through, 5 marks in pairs. When I was there, There were 3 marks. I felt cold. So it's counting something. I think so. What? Visits, maybe. Nights, sitters. I don't know. She stopped. Or it could be counting down. I looked at the wall of my kitchen. My calendar hung on the wall, the kind with photos of national parks. October's photo was Zion Canyon, red and gold. You said don't go back, I said, in your first message. That's my recommendation. But you went 6 times. I know. And you still think I should stop. I think every time you go back, you get closer to the point where stepping back doesn't feel like the obvious thing to do. She sounded tired. Not scared anymore. Just tired in the way of someone who has been carrying something for a while. It's not a horror movie. It doesn't grab you. It just adjusts, I think. Adjusts to you. Figures out your specific version of curious. Your specific version of sympathetic. Owen told me it was lonely. It probably told you something different. I thought about what Owen had said on that second Friday. He said you seem nice. He could tell from your voice. My specific version of sympathetic. A 23-year-old studying early childhood education, who liked kids, who took the job seriously, who genuinely wanted to understand the children in her care. It had heard me come in. It had heard me say my name. And it had known. Thank you for calling me back, I said. Be careful. She said it plainly, without drama. And for what it's worth, I don't think Owen knows what he's part of. I genuinely don't. He's just a kid talking to what he thinks is a friend. None of this is his fault. We hung up. I sat on my kitchen floor for another few minutes. Then I got up, washed my face, and went to bed. I lay there for a long time thinking about the 5 pairs of marks. The word soon. Whether there was a connection between when those marks had started and when the bolt had been bent. I thought about what Magdalena had said, that it can't open the door itself, that someone on the other side has to want to. I fell asleep thinking about locks that don't keep things in. I went back the following Friday. I know how that sounds. I want to explain it without making it sound like I had no choice, because I did have a choice. I could have quit, the way Magdalena had. But I had been turning something over all week that I could not let go of. Owen was 6 years old. His parents thought they were managing an imaginary friend situation. His therapist had given them language for it that kept them comfortable and kept them from looking too closely. And whatever was in that basement had been communicating with their son, sending things through the gap under a door, learning the names of the adults in and out of his life, running what amounted to a long, patient process of introduction and cultivation, aimed ultimately at getting one of us to open that door. I couldn't prove any of that. I want to be clear. All I had was a bent bracket, some scrapes on wood, a clay bowl with a dime and a marble in it, a note from a previous babysitter, and a phone call. None of it would have meant anything to anyone else. But I had also been working with children long enough to know that the people most at risk in these situations are not the adults. Adults can choose to leave. Owen couldn't. Owen lived there. Whatever was below that door, Owen went to bed 20 feet from it every night. He woke up 20 feet from it every morning. He sat on the kitchen floor and walked toy dinosaurs on the tile in front of it, and reported the messages it asked him to pass along, and accepted whatever it sent back through the gap. And he had no framework for understanding that this was not a friendship. That's why I went back. I told myself that was the whole reason. That might even have been true. Renata let me in and gave me the rundown. She didn't mention the basement or Owen's friend, and I didn't bring it up. She mentioned that Owen had been having some trouble sleeping, waking up in the middle of the night, coming to their room. She'd scheduled an extra session with the therapist. Her voice was carefully calm when she said it, the same careful calm she'd used when she'd told me about the door on my first night. I asked, as offhandedly as I could, has he said why he's waking up? Renata looked at me for just a moment before answering. He says his friend talks to him at night sometimes, and it's hard to fall back asleep after. I nodded. She looked away. After they left, Owen and I ate dinner, grilled cheese again, at his request, with the same executive chef supervision. He seemed fine. A little tired, maybe, slightly slower in his delivery of the anglerfish updates he'd saved up for me, but fundamentally himself. We did reading worksheets. He had graduated to a longer list of sight words and was cautiously satisfied with his progress, though he maintained that because remained unjustifiable. Around 7:30 I said, "Can I ask you something about your friend?" Owen looked up from his worksheet. "Yeah. When he talks to you at night, does he come up to your room?" He shook his head. "He can't leave the basement. He says the stairs are as far as he goes." "The stairs." I kept my voice even. "He comes up the stairs?" "He talks from the top of the stairs." He tapped his pencil on the worksheet. "I can hear him through the door. He's quiet so he doesn't wake my parents up." The bolt was on the kitchen side of the door. If something came up the stairs and stood at the top, it would be right behind the door, an inch of painted wood between it and the kitchen, between it and the hallway, between it and the rest of the house. "Does he talk to you about the same things as usual?" I asked. Owen considered this. Sometimes he tells me things." "What kinds of things?" The pencil tapping stopped. Owen looked at me with his serious face. Not the curious face, not the explaining face. The other one, the one that made him look older than he was. "He told me why the stairs are as far as he goes." I waited. "He said somebody decided a long time ago that the door was the edge, that he stays below the edge. He said it was a decision that got made without him, and he didn't think it was fair, but he respects it." "That's generous," I said carefully. Owen nodded, as if I'd made a reasonable point. "He said the only way to change the edge is if somebody on this side moves it. He said he would never ask for that. He said he just wants company." He looked back at his worksheet, found his pencil, started working on the next word. "I think it makes him sad that he has to stay down there." Sad. Magdalena had said the same word. And I understood, hearing it from Owen, exactly how it functioned. Sad was the softest possible framing. Sad made the problem feel like one you could fix. Sad made you feel, if you chose not to fix it, that you were the one causing the harm. "Owen," I said, "has he ever told you what he looks like?" Owen put the pencil down. He seemed to be genuinely thinking about it. "He says it's hard to explain. He says he used to look different. He says he's been there long enough that he doesn't remember exactly what he looks like anymore." He looked up at me. He said that's another sad thing about being down there too long. You start to forget yourself. I sat with that for a moment. "Does he want to be remembered?" I said. Owen tilted his head. "He wants to be known." He said it simply, like it was a clear distinction. He said being remembered is about the past. Being known is about right now. He wants someone to know him right now. The kitchen light was warm and ordinary. The worksheet was on the table. Pepper was asleep on the rug near the sliding door to the backyard. Everything about the scene was completely normal, and Owen was saying things with the flat, relaying voice, and I was writing notes in my head faster than I could process them. "I think it's time to start winding down," I said. He accepted that without argument. I did something that night that I hadn't done before. After Owen was asleep and the house was quiet, I went to the kitchen and got down on my hands and knees in front of the basement door with my phone flashlight. Magdalena had told me to look more closely. I looked. The horizontal scratches were there, the ones I'd seen before, full width, from whatever had been slid through the gap. But she was right. They weren't all horizontal. Grouped among them, between the horizontal marks, there were finer lines running vertically. I held the flashlight at a low angle to see them better. They were shallow, lighter than the horizontal marks, but deliberate in their spacing. They were grouped in clusters of 2, pairs, 5 of them. Same count as the tally marks on the paper, but the vertical marks were old. The paint around them was yellowed slightly at the edges, which meant they'd been there long enough to oxidize. Months, at least, maybe longer. Whatever was recording down there had been recording long before Owen had started leaving the bowl on the counter, long before the Vasquezes had put a bolt on the door, long before Magdalena. I sat back on my heels and thought. 5 pairs. On the door. 5 pairs on the paper. Magdalena had said there were 3 marks on the paper when she was sitting. 3 pairs, presumably. That was spring. Now it was October. The paper in Owen's bowl had 5 pairs, and the word soon below them. 5 sitters, maybe. 5 names heard in this kitchen, through this door. Renata had said Owen had been doing this for a month. The bolt had gone up 3 weeks ago, but the marks on the door were older than that, which meant Owen wasn't the beginning of this. Something moved at the back of my thinking then, a cold, careful thought that I turned away from because I wasn't ready for it. I filed it without examining it and stood up. I turned off the kitchen light. I went to the living room. I sat on the couch and opened my notes app and typed everything I could remember. What Owen had said, word for word, as accurately as I could. Being remembered is about the past. Being known is about right now. The stairs are as far as he goes. The edge was decided without him. At 10:15 I heard something. I want to be precise here, because it would be easy to exaggerate this and I don't want to. It was quiet. If I hadn't been sitting in a completely silent house, I might not have caught it. It was a sound from the direction of the kitchen. Not loud, not dramatic. Almost like the sound a house makes when it's settling. Except it wasn't random. It had a rhythm to it. Slow and even, like footsteps, ascending. I sat very still and listened. The sound stopped. A long pause. Then, once, something made contact with the interior surface of the basement door. Not a knock. Lower than a knock. Closer to the floor. Brief. Then nothing. I stayed on the couch and did not go to the kitchen. I stared at the hallway between the living room and the kitchen, and I breathed carefully, and I reminded myself of everything I'd decided, and everything Magdalena had said, and I stayed exactly where I was. Pepper had lifted her head. She was looking toward the kitchen with her ears pressed flat. After about 4 minutes, she lowered her head back onto the armrest and closed her eyes. Renata and Daniel came home at 11:20. Daniel handed me cash and offered to drive me to the bus stop again. On the way, he said, without looking away from the road, "How was Owen tonight? Was he okay?" "He was good. Normal evening." Daniel nodded. 3 blocks passed. "Renata and I are looking into some things," he said, "about the house, history of the property, stuff like that. We bought it from an estate sale. The previous owner had been there a long time." He said the last part carefully, like he was leaving space in the sentence for me to fill. I didn't fill it. "We might have some more information soon," he said, "about the history." He pulled up to the bus stop. I thanked him and got out, and I stood there in the cold for a moment, watching his car pull away. History of the property. Previous owner. He hadn't volunteered what they'd found so far, just that they were looking, which meant they had started looking, which meant something had moved them toward looking. I thought about the cold thought I'd filed away in the kitchen, the one I hadn't been ready for. If the marks on the door were older than Owen's friendship with his basement companion, if they predated Magdalena, if they predated the Vasquezes entirely, then the Vasquezes were not the first family in that house, and Owen was not the first child, and whatever was below that door had been practicing this specific sequence. The gifts, the names, the careful language about loneliness and being known, for longer than any of us had been alive. I got on the bus and rode home. I did not message Magdalena that night. There was nothing concrete enough yet to say. But I opened the Sitter Connect app and went back to the Vasquez listing, and I looked at the internal notes section again. Magdalena's note was still the only one. I thought about that. 6 weeks, Magdalena had said, but the listing had been up longer than 6 weeks. The Vasquezes had been using the app for over a year, according to the account creation date visible on the profile, which meant there had been other sitters before Magdalena who had left no note at all. I found the contact page for Sitter Connect and sent a message asking whether there was a way to see inactive sitters who had previously matched with a specific family. They responded 3 days later, saying that information was private and they could not share it, which was expected. But I kept the contact information in my notes because I had the feeling I might need it. The following Friday, I arrived to find Renata standing in the kitchen with a manila folder on the counter in front of her. Daniel was already gone. He had a work event he couldn't move. It would just be Renata getting ready and then heading out. She was still in her coat from work, and she'd clearly been standing at the counter looking at whatever was in the folder for a while before I came in. "Close the front door," she said. I did. She opened the folder. Inside were photocopied documents. County records, it looked like. Property transfer records. She spread them on the counter without saying anything, and let me look. The house on Meadowlark Court had been through 4 owners since it was built in 1961. The Vasquezes had bought it in 2019 from the estate of a man named Harold Croft, who had owned it since 1987. Before Croft, a family named Esterhouse from 1974 to 1987. Before that, the original owners, a couple named Raymond and Dorothea Fell, from 1961 to 1974. Harold Croft was 79 when he died, Renata said. He lived alone in this house for 32 years. His estate listed no next of kin. She turned to a second page in the folder. It was a printout from a local newspaper archive, the Columbus Dispatch. I found this in the archived records from 1974. The article was 4 paragraphs, the kind of brief notice that appeared in the local section before the internet made everything searchable. The headline was, "Clintonville man cited in welfare check. No further action taken." The man cited in the welfare check was Raymond Fell. His neighbors in 1974 had called in a concern because his wife, Dorothea, had not been seen in several weeks. Police had performed a welfare check. Raymond Fell had been present and cooperative. He'd stated that Dorothea had left, that she had chosen to leave, and he hadn't heard from her since. Police had found no evidence of wrongdoing. No further action had been taken. The house had sold 6 months later. Raymond Fell's forwarding address listed as a motel in Gahanna. No further mention of Dorothea Fell in any record Renata had found. He sold the house to the Esterhouse family, Renata said, and the Esterhouse family sold it to Harold Croft 13 years later. Harold Croft was a bachelor and a recluse, and he lived here alone until he died in his bedroom in 2018, at which point the estate sat for a year and we bought it. "And the basement?" I said. Renata looked at me steadily. When we toured the house, the basement had been used for storage, boxes, old furniture, Harold Croft's things. We cleared most of it out before we moved in. She paused. There was a workbench down there that the estate agent told us was original to the house. We left it. Another pause. I started thinking about it this week. The workbench is against the wall, directly below this door. I haven't been down there to check it, but I started thinking about whether there was anything on it that we hadn't looked at carefully. I waited. Daniel went down yesterday morning. She put her hand on the folder, not opening it further. He found something on the workbench. Under a piece of canvas we hadn't moved. She stopped. What was it? A notebook, she said. Harold Croft's, we think. The handwriting matched some notes we found in the house when we moved in. Grocery lists, things like that. She opened the folder to the last page. It was a photograph, taken on Daniel's phone, I guessed, and printed on their home printer, slightly grainy. It showed a page of handwriting. The ink was faded but legible. The date at the top was March 1994. I leaned in to read it. The page said, "It has been 11 years, and I have not opened the door. I have decided I will not. The Fells should have known better. RF understood what he had built and should have known better. I have counted the marks, and I believe I understand the system. Each pair is a person it has spoken to. I am the 5th. It is patient. It has been patient with all of us. I have not touched the door since the first winter. I believe touching it is an act of consent. I believe it can only reach you fully once you have touched it. I no longer go into the kitchen at night. It has not sent anything in 2 years. I believe this means it is waiting. I have learned that it is very good at waiting." The photograph ended there. The page had more text below, but the frame of the photo cut it off. I straightened up. 5 pairs of marks. 5 people it had spoken to. The marks on the door were old enough to be yellowing. Harold Croft had been the 5th, writing in 1994. He'd lived in the house until 2018. And now the paper in Owen's bowl had 5 pairs of marks on it. Not the same count as Croft's. A new count. A new 5. Renata was looking at me with the expression of someone who has been holding something alone for several days, and is finally setting it down. "Owen," I said. She closed the folder. "I know. He's been talking to it for months. It's been..." I stopped, because I didn't know how to say the rest without sounding like I'd lost my grip on something. I know, Renata said again. Her voice was controlled, but barely. We're pulling him from his sessions with his current therapist. We're looking for someone with a different background. Someone who deals with... Daniel found a name. We have an appointment. She straightened up. I need to know if you're willing to come back one more time. Not because I don't understand if you're not. I understand completely if you're not. But Owen is comfortable with you, and we need 2 more weeks to get everything arranged. And having someone here he knows. I'll come back, I said. On one condition. She looked at me. I need to see the rest of that notebook page. She nodded. She'd already thought of this. She reached into the folder and produced a second photograph, slightly darker, the lower half of the same page. I read it. It has asked me, through a child who used to play in the yard next door, whether I will let it come up the stairs. I said no. The child no longer comes around. I suspect it has finished with him. I have thought about what it wants at length. I do not believe it wants to come upstairs. I believe it wants the door open. An open door is different from a door that has been passed through. An open door is a decision. I believe the decision is what it needs. Not the act, the consent. Raymond Fell built something in the basement in 1963. He told the neighbors it was a root cellar extension. His wife disappeared in 1974. I have always believed RF opened the door one night and sent her down and closed it again. I believe the counting of marks began then. I do not know what came first, the thing or the root cellar. I do not know if RF found it or made it. I only know it is very old and very patient, and it has learned how to speak to people in the specific language of their own loneliness. I will not open the door, but I am 62 years old, and I will not live forever. I hope whoever comes after me understands what they are living near. I set the photograph down on the counter. The kitchen was warm. The overhead light was on. The basement door was 6 feet away, bolt engaged, exactly as it had been every night I'd stood in this kitchen. Pepper came and sat on my foot. I thought about Harold Croft writing that page in 1994, writing it in the basement, on the workbench directly below where I was standing, with the thing he was writing about a few feet away from him, in whatever the root cellar was. Living in this house for another 24 years after that. Refusing. I thought about Owen's bowl, the dime, the marble, the paper that said soon. I thought about what soon meant when the thing counting down had already counted to 5, twice. What's below the basement, I said. Renata looked at me. Below the basement floor. Harold Croft says Raymond Fell built a root cellar extension. Is there a root cellar? She was quiet for a moment. We didn't find a root cellar when we moved in. But you didn't look for one. She didn't answer. That was its own kind of answer. I put both photographs back in the folder and slid it across to her. I'll be here Friday, I said. She nodded. She looked like she hadn't slept well in several days, which I suspected was true. I went down the hall to find Owen. He was in his room, sitting cross-legged on the floor, with his dinosaurs arranged in a loose circle around him. He'd placed the Stegosaurus in the center. He was looking at it when I came in. "Hey," I said. He looked up. His face was tired in the way of a child who has not been sleeping, but when he saw me, something in it loosened. "Hi, Kara." I sat down on the floor across from him. Pepper followed me in and settled between us. "Can I ask you something?" I said. He nodded. "Has your friend ever told you what he's waiting for?" Owen picked up the Stegosaurus and held it in both hands. He looked at it for a moment, turning it over. Then he looked at me. "He said he's waiting for the right person," he said. "He said most people are almost right, but not quite. He said he's been waiting for someone who really wants to understand." I looked at Owen's face. His dark eyes were steady and honest, the eyes of a child passing along information he didn't fully have the context for. "Does he think he's found her?" I asked. Owen set the Stegosaurus down in the center of the circle of dinosaurs. He arranged it carefully, adjusted it once, looked at it. "He says yes," Owen said. "He says he found her the first night she came. The hallway behind me was quiet. The house was quiet. I could hear the heat running through the vents, and Pepper breathing, and nothing else. Owen looked up at me. His expression was kind, the way children are kind when they're delivering something they think is good news. He says she's been touching the door every time she visits, he said. He says she doesn't realize she's already decided. I didn't move. He says the deciding isn't about the handle, Owen said. He says the deciding is about wanting to know what's down there more than you're afraid of it. He tilted his head. He says that happened for you a while ago. He says he's just waiting for you to catch up. I sat on the floor of Owen's room, and I thought about every night I had gone to that door. Every night I had told myself I was checking, investigating, being responsible. Every time the curiosity had risen up and I had followed it, step by step, closer. Magdalena had said, it adjusts to you, figures out your specific version of curious. An early childhood education student who liked understanding things. Who went toward mysteries instead of away from them. Who had come back to the house, week after week, for reasons she told herself were about the child. I looked at the stegosaurus in the center of the circle. I thought about what Harold Croft had written. It has learned how to speak to people in the specific language of their own loneliness. I was not lonely, I knew that. But there is a specific thing that lives next to curiosity. In people who study children for a living. A need to understand. To not leave a thing half known. To follow the thing to its conclusion. Because not following it feels like a failure of attention. It had read me correctly. From the first night, I stood up. I looked at Owen. I'm going to make your dinner, I said. Grilled cheese okay? He nodded. He seemed satisfied, the way he sometimes seemed satisfied after reporting something, as if the message had been passed, and his part was done. I walked to the kitchen. I stood at the stove with my back to the basement door. I buttered the bread and heated the pan, and pressed the spatula down the way Owen liked. And the whole time I stood there, I did not turn around. I did not turn around. But I was aware, with a clarity I hadn't had before, that the decision Croft had written about, the one made before the handle is touched, was the decision I was going to have to make, and soon, and that it was going to be harder to make correctly than I had understood when I had first walked into this house and read a note on the counter and thought to myself that it was probably just a safety thing. The grilled cheese was done. I plated it, cut it diagonally the way he liked, poured him a glass of water. I turned around. The basement door looked exactly as it always looked, flush in the frame, bolt engaged, the kitchen light falling across its painted surface, dust along the top edge. The faint marks at the bottom that I had not been able to stop thinking about since the night I first crouched down and saw them. I stood there for exactly 3 seconds. Then I called Owen to dinner, and I turned off the thought like a light. But the thought didn't go entirely dark. It just waited, the way it had always been waiting, patient. That concludes tonight's file. If you've ever experienced something strange or unexplained, I'd love to hear your story. You can share it in the comments, or send it to the email in the description. It might become a future case on Midnight Files. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, subscribe and join me for more documentary-style horror stories. Until next time, stay curious. And remember, sometimes the things we can't explain are the ones we never forget.